Hello everyone, welcome to my patch 15.7 mid lane tier list. So I want to start this one off by talking about LeBlanc. So LeBlanc didn't receive any actual gameplay changes, but I figured that there's going to be a lot of people wondering, how is she in the meta, is the champion good, and looking into picking her up. I would say LeBlanc is a pretty good champion. There's like a couple downsides though. So the first thing is that, at least as a blind pick, she's pretty good. Like, she's definitely on the higher end of blind picks, but Ahri is kind of a better blind pick while also being easier to play. So in some regards, it's like if you're trying to add a champion to your pool, it's like, why not add Ahri instead of LeBlanc? Because, it's going to reward you a lot earlier, and it's probably going to be more rewarding in general. That being said, LeBlanc is definitely better as a counter pick. There's certain melee matchups that you would like to pick LeBlanc into that you could play Ahri into, but you wouldn't want to. So an example would be like, you can play Ahri versus Yone, but you prefer to play LeBlanc. Or you can play Ahri versus, again, Silas, Akali, Zed, etc. Like, Ahri can deal with all these as a neutralizer, but LeBlanc actually wins against a lot of these. So I think that, if you want to put in the effort, you definitely can just like play her all the time. She is a solid one trick. I put her pretty high on my one trick tier list. I do think that like there is probably just more value though in using her as a counter pick, mainly because Ahri exists. Like, I think if Ahri didn't exist, LeBlanc would kind of be a really good blind. So specifically, again, counter pick into kind of like melee matchups or things that you can abuse, or if you have like a ganking jungler or a ganking support, that definitely increases LeBlanc's value. So yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way before we turn to the actual changes. So first one we have is Naafiri. So Naafiri got some changes here, and she also got some further nerfs and a hotfix. I think overall it is a slight nerf, but there are some, slight buffs. Like having extra wave clear is quite nice, and I don't know, there are just like little things across the board. And again, I think at the very top they mentioned that they took away a little bit of her Q damage at like later ranks and stuff. So I don't know, it does all add up. I still have her pretty high on the list. I'm tempted to move her a little lower, mainly because we're kind of moving into Rod of Ages meta, and I'll talk about that later in the video. And that would be the same for any assassin. I think that Naafiri is definitely more DPS focused than a lot of the assassins, but there is an argument that things like LeBlanc or Naafiri or whatever should go lower, but I'm going to kind of come back to that and explain when I get to it. So yeah, still very solid. Overall seems like a pretty OP champion in both mid and jungle. Our next one here, Xerath. So I think Xerath still kind of just like gets outperformed by other mages. I don't know, the buffs to me feel a little bit cosmetic. I feel like, the lower base damages means that like you're going to do, I think, like lower damage until you get to like 2 items or something, and that's when you're kind of going to be breaking even. Like I said, I still think that Xerath suffers from the problem of having overlap with a lot of other champions. Like, why play Xerath as your poke mage when you could play something like Lux, or you could play something like Hwei, even like things like Victor if you're using like Xerath as your mage counterpick. So he's definitely not a bad champion. Like, I wouldn't see Xerath being in B as being like, this champ's awful. I definitely don't think that is, but it does share overlap with like a lot of other things that are kind of better. And again, potentially suffers from Rod of Ages meta, which I will come to. The Yone changes seem like a pretty big buff overall. Like, he deals a sizable amount more damage when he's got his items. I think this, it is going to like affect him sometimes, like not being able to cleanse the CC. But from what I have seen, Yone is just straight up stronger than before, which is kind of crazy because the champion was already extremely strong. And so him being buffed is just absurd. I think probably the best AD mid overall, unless you're willing to play, kind of like the Akshan solo Q cheese. But definitely something worth investing into if you haven't already. I think it's super, super solid. Now, I want to get to the main point of this video, which is the Rod of Ages changes. So, first off, I kind of just want to talk about ROA as an item before even talking about the changes. So, ROA's kind of like misunderstood. Like, ROA is a really, really, really good neutralizer, right? So that means if you're in a bad matchup, Catalyst is one of the best ways to stabilize that matchup, and that's what you'd see, like on a champion like Cassiopeia, right? When you'd play into difficult matchups, you would often see them going Rod of Ages. ROA is also pretty good into assassin matchups because the extra tankiness, if you know you're going to outscale, means that, again, you can kind of neutralize them in the early game while also being like too tanky for them in a one-shot, and then you will win the like long trade. So just like by default as an item, ROA, again, neutralizer and counter to assassins. Now, what was the downside of ROA? Mainly that the item itself just wasn't that good. Like the completed item, I think Catalyst previously, even before the buff, was quite good, but the completed item is not that great. It takes a while to, kind of get going. It doesn't have a lot of the stats that mages want. Like HP can kind of be a wasted stat a lot of the time. So in essence, it neutralized your opponent, but it also neutralized you as well. And also it competes with a lot of really good items. Like on Cassie, for example, I never built ROA because it's like, if you go Roa and then Xerath, so you're delaying like Liandry and Rylai by an additional item, right? And that's kind of how I felt for a lot of champs, is that there's just no point building Roa because it's going to slow you down too much. And then I guess another thing is like, okay, well, why would you not just build it in like bad matchups or whatever? And my kind of argument to that, and again, I like to use Cassio as an example, would be, you know, if you're in a matchup where you need to build Roa, you probably just shouldn't have blinded that champion, right? You shouldn't have ended up in that bad matchup, and I specifically avoided matchups on Cassio where I would have to build Roa. Now, Roa kind of started gaining popularity with the Ahri build that came up. So the Ahri build was to go Rod of Ages into Liandry into Riftmaker. And I think this was like actually a pretty good build. And I kind of had like a different approach to it on other champions because, you know, on other champs, it's like, okay, well, you know, again, if you ended up in this matchup, you probably shouldn't have blinded it. But the thing is, like, Ahri is kind of our premier blind. Like, Ahri probably is the best blind pick in the game, at least for mid. And so it's like, okay, if you are going to play like some difficult matchups, you know, things like the Victor or the Syndra or Assassin matchups, you know, like a Fizz or, I don't know, an Akali or something, then it makes a lot of sense to build Roa. I don't think you should have been buying it every game, but it definitely is good. So with all that context out of the way, now I think you can kind of understand like why the changes are such a big deal. So what do they actually do to Catalyst? First off, the component itself is just much better when completed, right? It's got more mana and more mana regen, which is really, really nice. And remember, this is already the best part of building Roa, is that you get to buy Catalyst, in my opinion. But the big thing is they made the build path so much better. Now it builds out of 2 rubies rather than just 1, and it's like easier to complete, obviously, because you can just like invest this into the ruby crystal instead without just like sitting on extra gold. This is such a big deal because, again, remember that the time you're going to buy this is probably either in a, you know, losing poke lane when you're just like trying to survive and it's really difficult to get through that lane. Now being able to just like spend that gold and extra HP makes that quite a bit easier. Or the other time you're buying this was into an assassin matchup. And even if you could have gone something like Ruby Crystal, Sapphire refill, it's much better to go 2 rubies and refill, right? And just have like so much HP that you actually can't be killed. So essentially they have made this even better at its niche to the point where it's probably like really, really OP as like a neutralizer. Like it already was a good option, but I think now it's just like ridiculously OP as a neutralizer. So what does this kind of mean for the meta? I think it means that champions that are super reliant on bullying lane and that I guess like need to bully lane in order to win the game, I think definitely lose value. So I'm thinking things like Victor, you know, like even though Victor has like good scaling and stuff, it's like, you know, his 2v2s and stuff are really weak and you're really reliant on just destroying your lane. I think things like Syndra and Ori that, you know, Ori's got good 2v2s, can buff other people. Syndra, you know, still very heavy on the CC, can scale up very well. I think these champs are fine. But yeah, definitely like pure lane bullies suffer. And then I also think like burst champions probably suffer. So I think I moved like things like Akali and LeBlanc down, both because, you know, again, I think if your opponent just builds Rod of Ages on their first base, that's pretty rough. Other poke champions that I moved, I think I moved Mel down to B, because again, like a lot of like what Mel does is after she gets chapter, maybe level 7, she can start looking for kills. And I think now that's like much more difficult. So there's definitely just like I kind of shifted a bunch of champions around because, you know, now it's just much harder to actually win lane in like a meaningful way compared to before. Because again, like if you're playing a champion that's weak in lane, or if you're playing like a bad match or whatever, it's really good just to go Roa. Now, I do think that Roa is being overbought a little bit. So I'll show you a couple examples of this. So the first off, this is actually a game from before the bus, but there was this game where Caps in the LEC final of last split went for Roa against Talia. I really don't think this is good. So the reason I don't think this is good is because you would want to try and pressure this matchup harder if you can. And again, like Roa is a neutralizer for both sides, which is quite good for Talia because Talia outscales. And also remember that Talia has like a lot of DPS. You know, like I've seen a lot of people building Roa into, for example, Yone, and I think that just doesn't make a lot of sense. That again means you can't put as much pressure on the lane, and they don't really care about being able to like burst through your Roa because they have tons of DPS, right? So I think games like this really lose value, I guess, for Roa. Another example I saw of this, I saw Zeka going Rod of Ages versus Deer, which again to me just doesn't feel like it's as useful, right? I think you would be better off just like playing to, you know, win the lane harder basically, and to like I think you're kind of wasting a lot of this health unless you're against a burst champion. Again, if you're against a burst champion like Fizz or Talon or something, I think it goes absolutely insane. So then you might be wondering, okay, like why are these players like building Rod of Ages then in games where it's like maybe not good? So it could just be a mistake, right? It's very possible. But the other answer to that could be that, you know, in high-low play, the laning phase is like really, really, really important. because like whoever can get prior to the lane, you know, is able to get like deeper vision and have prior for objectives and, you know, ensure better bases. Like basically, even if ROA is like a worse one item, if just by buying Catalyst and your opponent doesn't buy Catalyst, if that just makes it so your lane is so strong that you can't be beaten, it might be worth buying even though the item itself is weaker, right? Like build paths do matter and the laning phase matters a lot too. So it's possible that, you know, again, in higher elo games, like people have kind of, you know, come to the conclusion that, you know, if you're playing against someone that has a Catalyst and you don't, like it's just too hard to lane. Now, again, I'm not sure that's actually true. I do think it's being overbought. I think a lot of people buying it on Ahri, especially in the bad matchups, has been good. But again, I think into things like Yone or tldr, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Whereas into like more burst heavy champions, like something like an Aurora, I think it is really, really good. So TLDR, I think that ROA should be bought in either assassin matchups or really losing matchups in order to help neutralize. I don't think you should be buying it in matchups where you can bully. There is an argument for buying it in even matchups, right? Like I would say if Catalyst allows you to win a lane that you would have lost otherwise, or if, you know, your opponent building Catalyst is going to cause you to lose and, you know, like end up losing so much that your added scaling from a better item isn't worth it, then you can go ROA. Something I almost forgot to mention is that they did do some nerfs targeted at reducing the value of Symbiotic Soles. So there's not that many mids that just run this every game, but Xerath is the big one. You see it on Quinn sometimes as well, and it was also bought just like as a neutralizer or like situationally on things like Rise. I do think that this change, I don't think it kills the playstyle at all. I've still seen plenty of people playing, you know, Cho'Gath on the new patch, and I've actually seen a few Korean pros and stuff experimenting with it as well. So I definitely still think it's good. Also, if you were one of those champs that like went Symbiotic Soles before to neutralize, probably you're better off swapping over to Catalyst now in order to do that. I guess certain champs might be unable to. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's not a huge deal. Admittedly, I haven't like really played around with it, but I haven't felt it, you know, off playing against it. And again, like plenty of people are playing it, so I didn't really move those. I don't really think there's really anything else. Actually, there's like a Pantheon randomly in C tier. I don't even know how he got there. I'm pretty sure Pantheon is somewhere. I don't even know how he got there. Let's put Pantheon. I'm not sure. Pantheon is pretty decent. I'll just quickly talk about Pantheon, I guess. I think Pantheon is probably better as a one trick in another lane, but I do think he's like a reasonable counter to, you know, like blind pick AD mids, or even, I guess, like blind pick AP melees. The reason I think you don't see more Pantheon mid is probably just because, like, if you are going to play a champion that's like a counter specifically to things that don't really get blinded, right? Like if Pantheon is your counter to Yasuo, right? Like you won't even see Yasuo blinded often. It's kind of like not worth the investment, and especially when there are champions that kind of do that, but like can be picked much more frequently, right? You can invest time into Akali or something, and then you would be able to counterpick the blind Yasuo as well, also being able to pick it way more. So, I don't know, it's solid, but not amazing. I think that's going to be it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, please let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you guys in the next one.